educator, speaking to us from Haiti. We now go live to Ansel Herz, an independent journalist who's been living in Haiti since September. We're talking to him through Skype. Ansel, welcome to Democracy Now! Can you describe the situation at this point?
People, I think, are still in the streets trying to stay away from houses and walls and buildings that can further collapse, buildings that are fragile. The house that I was staying in, for example, is still standing. It's one of the few multi-story buildings in my neighborhood that did not collapse entirely, but there are cracks in the foundation. So as your previous guest in the recording said, people are extremely scared, especially when there are aftershocks that seem to just come randomly, that there's going to be further destruction. And so people are in the streets, people are in the public squares, looking, waiting for some kind of help. But there's really not much of it forthcoming at all that I've seen. I was in the streets all day yesterday and the day before since the earthquake. I didn't see a single aid worker or a single official aid convoy from the Haitian government or from an aid agency or from the peacekeeping force that's here, the United Nations. So it's just a terrible situation, and I think people are just trying to survive day to day.
And Ansel, what about the local police, or have there been any organized efforts by some of the communities to try to do some kind of rescue?
I haven't seen efforts on a community level, but I have seen efforts of just a dozen or 24 people centered around a building that's collapsed, schools that collapsed downtown, hearing children cry out from beneath the rubble, hearing people or seeing somebody and just trying to dig through with their hands or also with shovels and with pickaxes to try to get those people out. You know, at the National Cathedral, for example, a huge part of that building just fell off, and there were a bunch of men trying to pull a woman out from the door. She was just squeezed in there, and she looked like she was nearly dead, but they were just trying to pull her out as hard as they could. And so there's a lot of that going on, just ordinary Haitians trying to help each other because there's nobody else that they can rely on.
Ansel, can you describe what happened 2 days ago at 5 o'clock? Where were you? What did you feel?
I was in my house in a neighborhood called Jacquet that I share with Haitians. It's a relatively poor neighborhood below Pétionville, which is the wealthy suburb outside downtown Port-au-Prince. And I was in the second story of the house. Things started shaking. I wasn't sure what was happening, and then things started falling off the walls. And at that point, I realized what was going on. Thankfully, again, our house did not fall, but quickly left the building and went outside with my camera to start talking with people and shooting footage. There was just a state of panic in the streets. People screaming, people running every which way. I ended up hopping into a pickup truck with a man who was bleeding profusely from his head. They were, I think, trying to get to some kind of hospital to try to make their way to medical care, and they ended up having to just stop several yards down the road because of a blocked tree. And that man later, he just died a few minutes later, you know, because there was no access to any kind of emergency medical care at that time. And there were a lot of buildings in the area that were just collapsing on themselves, particularly large houses. And I saw bodies, you know, just squished between concrete as well. It was horrible.
And in terms of basic infrastructure with the city, electricity, water, what is the situation now? Is it in pockets in neighborhoods, or is it totally out throughout the city?
I think that some parts of the city do have electricity. Also, phone service is really spotty, but occasionally it seems to work. I've been able to receive a few calls and just on occasion make a call out, but many times there is no service. You know, in terms of food and water, there are markets that I've seen still operating where there's not a lot of destruction. There's water that's being sold on the street. So if you have money, if you're not totally destitute, which is not the case for a lot of Haitians, I think that you can get by. You can get some of the basic things that you need. But for people who are already poor and without jobs, I don't know, what they can do in terms of getting food, water, and shelter. I think they're out in the street on their own at this point, until some kind of large aid effort is able to make its way into the city.
And do you have any sense of that large aid effort? And can you talk about the twin crises? You've got the natural disaster of the earthquake, and then the poverty of Haiti and how that exacerbates the first. Everything from the way the buildings were built to the mountains, the hills that are deforested so that the buildings slide down the hills, for example, from Pétionville, deforested because people have gone up desperate over the years to get wood, for charcoal, anything to help them.
Yeah, one thing I can say, for example, that's a little bit striking is that the slum of Cité Soleil, the sprawling slum that's on the ocean side, I was able to get down there yesterday and sort of survey the scene, and I was actually surprised that the damage was not as bad as I expected. These are mostly one-room shacks and one-room just concrete buildings, and some of them had crumbled. Certainly, I interviewed people whose houses are gone, but the majority of the shacks are standing, and so Cité Soleil, I think, relative to some other parts of the city, Pétionville, that you mentioned, and other parts, Carrefour, certainly. I think Cité Soleil is actually not very hard hit, and that is the poorest part of Port-au-Prince. So I think I don't know if you can say that the poorest people in Port-au-Prince were hit the hardest. I just think that it's spread out, and particularly many of these multi-story buildings, schools, churches, and some of the larger homes. Those are many of the buildings that just fell completely, as well as the National Palace and the prison. I was down at the prison yesterday as well.